I got us into this mess. I'm going to get us out. Theresa May carrying that pledge that she made Monday to conservative backbenchers with her here to Paris after a day that has seen the UK Prime Minister negotiate with the DUP, the Northern Irish Unionist Party, over a deal to govern, and a first session of Parliament since last week's loss of an outright Conservative majority in the Commons. A weakened PM invited to dinner and a night out to see the France-England football friendly. Just how weakened? What is the possible deal with a DUP that's soft on Brexit and very hard on social values? Has Theresa May's electoral setback changed the course of Brexit negotiations that are due to open, by the way, next Monday? What are the possible scenarios both for Britain and also for its Prime Minister? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what Theresa May's game plan is. With us, Jeremy Stubbs, President of the British Conservatives in Paris. Welcome back.
Good evening.
From Strasbourg, Mary Honeyball, Labour member of the European Parliament. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you and good evening to everyone.
From London, Rory Broomfield, director of the Better Off Out campaign. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, great to be here.
And François Lafont, who teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, and who keeps a close eye on, I guess you could call it a triptych, right? There's France, there's Britain, there's also Germany in this mix.
Exactly.
Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Earlier, her first address to a new parliament, the returning Prime Minister, speaking of national unity.
As we face difficult challenges ahead, let us come together in a spirit of national unity to keep our country safe and build a stronger, fairer and more prosperous future for everyone in every part of our United Kingdom.
Yeah. Mary Honeyball, that call for national unity, are you going to pick up on it? Are you going to seize it?
Well, of course, everyone wants to see national unity. It's difficult to argue with it. But I think Britain at the moment is very far from united. In fact, I think people are very confused. The result of the referendum does not seem to be holding because recent opinion polls have shown that, in fact, there are a majority now of people who wish they had voted differently. And that's an important matter. The country's very confused, obviously, otherwise we would not have had the election result we did have. Perhaps as importantly, if not more importantly, there is a huge divide between the young and the old, and that was very much reflected in the general election results. The young voted overwhelmingly for my party, for the Labour Party. Elder people voted Conservative, and that divide has becoming more and more apparent. So I think talking about national unity is a difficult concept at the moment, and I think maybe Mrs May should think quite hard about what she means by that. And also, she has to accept democratic scrutiny even of her plans for Brexit, and that, in a sense, is contrary to unity because we need open debate and discussion about our future in the European Union.
Jeremy Stubbs, what does the Prime Minister mean when she talks of national unity?
Well, the first thing she means is forming a government, and we can't do anything until that's done. And that national unity will be the reflection of a majority, eventually constructed, put together in the House of Commons. So that's the first thing. Whether everybody in the country all agrees is another matter, but if you take, for example, Brexit, it's one area where Mrs May and Mr Corbyn actually do agree. They're both in favour of Brexit. It may well be that there are members of the Labour Party who disagree with that. There probably are in the Conservative Party, but that particular consensus holds.
Rory Broomfield, the point made there by Mary Honeyball that the latest poll shows that there's a line of fracture in Britain between the youth and the older voters.
Well, one poll may demonstrate that, and of course the poll that mattered was on the 8th of June, the general election, and Mary is right to indicate that constituencies like Canterbury, Sheffield and Lincoln all indicated a big population of the student vote going to the Labour Party. But this because, in my view, the Conservative Party didn't effectively make the economy front and stage on the election, and it didn't give the aspiration that many Conservatives hold dear as a principle to young people in the general election campaign. And if they had done, then you would have seen a lot more young people across the United Kingdom voting Conservative last Thursday.
All right, an often subdued Jeremy Corbyn seemed spirited during that opening session of Parliament when he remarked, he even joked about the expected delay in next Monday's Queen's speech, the speech that spells out government policy.
And I congratulate her on returning, and I'm sure she will agree with me that democracy is a wondrous thing and can throw up some very unexpected results. And I'm sure we all look forward to welcoming the Queen's speech just as soon as the coalition of chaos has been negotiated.
Coalition of chaos, François Lafont?
I like the expression. I mean, this is well seen. The point is maybe the UK is becoming more European in a way of doing politics, because for a long time when you vote, you used to vote in the UK, you know the evening who was the winner, what kind of government and prime minister, which is not anymore the case. I mean, this is a kind of Europeanization of the political scene of the UK. That's the first element. The second one is the comeback of the Parliament in the game. I mean, remember that some months ago, Prime Minister May wanted to go for the Brexit without taking into account the Parliament. Now the Parliament will be a bit more master of the time and the politics within the UK. So that's the second element. Third, I mean, the Europeans, the continentals, are waiting for negotiations. And I presume that Michel Barnier is looking to have a negotiator, somebody to whom he will be able to talk from next Monday, because it was planned to start on the 19th of June, which seems to be a bit also in a problematic situation.
All right, could it delay the Queen's speech, delay as well the start of Brexit negotiations, Jeremy Stubbs?
It might a little bit, but I think everybody is anxious for those to begin, and I'm sure that some brief but significant words on that subject will pass between Mrs May and Mr Macron when they see each other tonight. I mean, we're waiting for these negotiations to begin. They've got to start as early as possible. Even if tremendously important things are not said on the very first few days, they've got to make contact. This process must begin.
And do you have to have a deal on an alliance before that next Monday in that case?
Well, yes, I think the deal on the alliance should be announced from 1 hour.
How do you feel about it? How do you feel about a deal with the DUP, which has views which its critics call retrograde on the family, most notably homosexual rights, women's rights?
Well, I think, first of all, the DUP, like other parties from Northern Ireland, has emerged from a period of tragic troubles. There are many things in its past, but they've all evolved a long way, including Sinn Féin too. I think it's also fair to say that they're going to evolve on these other questions, these social questions, abortion, gay marriage, not if we reject them and say you're not fit to work in a government, but if we allow them to get close to us, as it were. And I think that what they will be asking for are things that are probably good for Northern Ireland as a whole, and also good for the Brexit process.
Good for the Brexit process. Mary Honeyball, the DUP in favour of a softer Brexit than many inside of the Conservative Party.
Well, there's two major things with the DUP, one of which you've touched on, which is social issues, and particularly on abortion rights, which the European Parliament has very strong views on, and we are very much in favour of a women's right to choose, which is not the DUP line. it's worth noting, before we talk too much more about the DUP in these subjects, that at the moment, last year, over 700 women left Northern Ireland because they couldn't get an abortion there, because the laws in Northern Ireland are different from the British mainland. And the DUP supports abortion only in cases where the woman's life is at risk. They don't even support abortion for rape. So that's how serious it is, and we have heard that there are those in the Conservative Party in Parliament who will introduce private members' bills to reduce abortion time limits if the agreement with the DUP goes ahead. So that's very, very serious, and it won't just be that they can write off these social issues and say they're no part of the agreement. They will be there. In terms of Brexit, of course, the one thing that the DUP and all the parties in Northern Ireland want is to maintain the open border with ERA, with Southern Ireland. And that's going to be difficult if we go for anything remotely hard in the Brexit negotiations, because that's absolutely key to it. And it's going to be a very, very difficult one to resolve. So I think even if there are initial talks very soon, as the previous speaker has said, they won't be about the main issues, because, to be quite honest, Theresa May doesn't seem to have worked out what she wants in the main issues. She didn't raise them in any substance in the general election campaign. She's now in a completely different situation, so she's got to rethink it, and we're not sure she even thought it through very well in the first place. It's a bit chaotic, to put it mildly. This is the real chaos.
Rory Broomfield, do you agree that coming to a consensus on an open border, the only land border the UK has with an EU member nation is Ireland, coming to a consensus on the open border with Ireland, free trade with the EU there, is going to be hard to obtain?
No, I don't agree with that statement, because everyone wants this free trade area. Everyone wants the common travel area to be maintained. Of course, that was there prior to the European Union. So it's really the status quo in those ideas, and there should be a note of caution when people say the DUP want an extreme soft Brexit or a softer Brexit, because ultimately there's many synergies with what the DUP was standing on in terms of its manifesto in the last general election, along with the Conservative Party, which ultimately gained the most seats in the House of Commons.
François Lafont?
Listen, I'm French, so this is domestic politics in a certain sense. If I see the problems from outside, I would say this is their business. The point is, first, they want to exit from the European Union, so we have to make sure that it will happen as soon as possible, because we are waiting for 1 year now from the referendum. And then after, we will try to find an agreement, a new agreement between the UK and the European Union. But the first step is to make sure that we separate, because it was the intent from the citizens. So the point is not to confuse everything and to say, well, maybe the custom union could be good, single market we will see, maybe one...
So hang on, what you're saying is there's no such thing as a soft Brexit. It's a hard Brexit, and then you negotiate.
No. The point from, if I have understood correctly, Michel Barnier, is to say, first, we have to separate the UK from the European Union, the 27 other members. And then, after, in the second step, we will try to find a new kind of agreement between UK and the other members. So this is a Norway system, this is a Switzerland, and so on. We have discussed already these kind of things. But in any case, this is my impression, the UK will lose something. They will not be able to pick up and to say, we want this, but not that, we want this. This is not a menu. I mean, you have to take everything.
Point taken, Rory Broomfield?
Well, we'll see how the negotiations progress. But, of course, the government has been clear in its manifesto in terms of the Conservative Party that they want to leave the single market, which is also agreed by the Labour Party. If you're looking at free movement of people, which the Labour Party want to end with regards to the European Union. So, again, actually, within the House of Commons, there is synergy over very crucial positions with regards to the European Union.
All right, warning against a deal with the DUP is the former Conservative Prime Minister, John Major. He spoke to the BBC earlier and said the danger is that however much any government tries, they will not be seen to be impartial if they're locked into a parliamentary deal at Westminster with one of the Northern Ireland parties, Jeremy Stubbs. You agree with John Major?
Well, various people, including Sir John, have raised these concerns, and they're perfectly legitimate. But being legitimate concerns, the government is well aware of them, and the government must try extra hard to make sure that the peace process and the rebuilding of a government in Northern Ireland goes ahead in the best possible way. I think that, indeed, Arlene Foster, on the side of the DUP, is herself rather more limited in her freedom than some people might say, because she has a responsibility to make that process work too.
But it's a funny time right now with a breakdown of the national unity government that's happening in Northern Ireland itself.
Well, one never chooses one's time exactly as one would like, but in fact I think that gives us an added impetus to make sure that this is got right on all sides. So I don't think that there is any need for scaremongering at this time. Need for caution, yes, very good idea. Scaremongering, no.
Mary Honeyball, do you agree?
Well, I don't totally disagree, but I think it's not helpful to use words like scaremongering. It's not only John Major who said this, and we mustn't forget that John Major was one of the architects of the peace process, followed later by Tony Blair. So John Major does know what he's talking about. It's also the Irish Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister. Enda Kenny has been very clear about this. And I do think that there is a real danger here because Northern Ireland itself is in a not particularly stable state because of the collapse of the power sharing agreement. And the peace process is still fragile, and there's a real danger that we could go back to some kind of troubles. So this is not an easy alliance to negotiate. The DUP obviously think that they can do it, but I think we all just need to be a little bit careful about what's going on here, because it could prove difficult and could cause us all a lot of problems. And the last thing we want to go back to is the Irish situation as it was 20, 30 years ago.
All right, the difficulties in Northern Ireland, just one of the issues on the table. Of course, more broadly, there's how Theresa May handles the continent. Remember, she's in Paris this Tuesday. We'll talk about it when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate. The Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson, who's married to her female partner and who strongly objects to the DUP's ultra-conservative family values, made her push for moderation, both when it came to Brexit and family values.
It's not about hard or soft. It's not even in many places about left or right. It's about open or closed. And I stand firmly on the side of open.
Yeah, and within the Conservative Party, there really seems to be a discussion going on. The British press says that that discussion goes beyond just the Conservative Party. The Daily Telegraph saying both Conservatives and Labour MPs have been working to flesh out a soft Brexit deal. The London Evening Standard, quoting cabinet members, the Evening Standard calling it a battle inside the cabinet, pitting sensibles versus creationists when it comes to Brexit negotiations. This is the paper of the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. Is it, Rory Broomfield, is there a battle going on between sensibles and creationists right now inside the British government?
Well, not that I know of. Steve Baker, who was leader of Conservatives for Leave and is a very prominent Brexiteer, has just been appointed to the Department for Exiting the EU. And George Osborne, along with others on his side of the Conservative Party, are seemingly yesterday's men. They are really revealing themselves to be bitter individuals who have lost their position within the party and are trying to wreck it for not just the party, but also for the country as a whole.
So what do you make of this cabinet reshuffle? I don't want to get too much into inside baseball, but the return of the likes of Michael Gove, what signal does that send to you?
It signals a positive one. Michael Gove was a prominent Leaver. He made the case vigorously during the referendum campaign last year and has been consistent in the view that the UK should leave the single market, should be open and global, and be the great globalists that we can be outside the EU.
Mary Honeyball, your thoughts on what's going on right now and your reaction to these reports that there are secret talks between Conservatives and Labour MPs going on?
Yeah, I've heard those reports, and I know there have been calls for a cross-party commission to look at the whole question of Brexit, which I actually think is a good idea. One of your French colleagues at the programme earlier talked about the UK becoming more like Europe in terms of its governance. I don't actually agree with that. I think we are still very much in a two-party situation with people taking up positions. Although people might disagree across the parties about Brexit, they still are within their silos. So I think the idea of having a cross-party negotiating commission who can actually achieve something in terms of Brexit, how it goes, what it looks like, is an extremely good idea, and that is much more European, and I would like very much to see that happening. In terms of George Osborne and the London Evening Standard, which of course is is in my region, and I read the Evening Standard, of course. I mean, George Osborne does have an agenda, obviously, but I think it's very healthy that we are having newspapers saying the sorts of things that the London Evening Standard is, because one thing that was very clear during the referendum campaign is that there were newspapers which are taking up a very, very amplified version of Leave and coming out with all sorts of things in a very, very biased way. So I think George Osborne is at least writing the balance slightly, and that's got to be good.
You agree with that, Jeremy Stubbs?
Oh, I think George Osborne is an ex-politician with his own axe to grind, and his newspaper has been grinding it.
When it comes to the tabloids, that they got too caustic, both last year during the referendum campaign and during the snap general election campaign just now.
Well, I think tabloids have been doing that for a very long time. There's nothing surprising, nothing new about that. What I think is important, really, is that to understand what's happening, this whole Brexit process was always going to be largely in two phases. A first phase after the referendum up until the launching of Article 50, the beginning of the negotiations, where it was really a question of reuniting the country over what had been a very divisive issue.
So when Mary Honeyball talks about how it would be a good idea to have a parliamentary commission that brings both sides of the aisle together, do you agree with her?
I don't know about that specifically, but I think we are in a new phase, and it's going to be, in some senses, much less of a controversial phase. I mean, what Theresa May did, I think, up until March, April, was a splendid job of reuniting people. People accepted the idea of Brexit. They've come to accept it, which is why it wasn't even an issue in the election. Much to Mrs. May's distress, in fact. It was a sign of her success. But now we're going to enter a period of negotiation. It's no longer a period of, say, talking tough for a domestic audience. It's a time, I think, of allowing the specialists, the negotiators, the technicians to get into the detail of that and find us the real agreement, soft or hard. I don't think it matters about the word. David Davis said himself, these are just propaganda terms. What we want is the deal that will work for everyone. That's got to start now, and it requires, I think, many minds to contribute to it. So I'm not at all against what Mary has said about some sort of cooperation. We've got to be more open now.
All right, you mentioned David Davis. He's the Brexit minister in the United Kingdom. This Tuesday, warning it could go well, those negotiations, or it could all go very wrong.
Yeah, this is part of the negotiation. You know, it's whether you're buying a house or doing an international trade negotiation or an international negotiation, you know, you always have to have the walkaway option. It's not a choice. It's not what you want, but you've got to have it there.
You always have to have the walkaway option. Is that walkaway option nearer or further away after the snap general election, François Lafont?
This is what they used to say. I mean, this is better to have no deal than a bad deal. So I presume this is exactly, I mean, they are still on this trend. The point is, according to me, that the population and some sector of activities of the UK, they realize what will be the consequences of the Brexit. I mean, you cannot just say it will be a soft Brexit. If you look at the Industrial Confederation, I mean, they are starting to understand what does it mean for the city, what does it mean for Airbus with 10,000 people going on the continent. I mean, there are a certain number of things, facts, that prove that it will be very complicated for the country to go outside the European Union. So now they have to find the way to make sure that maybe this is not what they are going to do. But it needs time, because you cannot overcome the decision of a referendum but this election is the first moment and say, well, she is weak, this prime minister, and they have no consensus of what she will do.
So does it bring the UK closer to a soft or a hard Brexit, this election result?
I don't know exactly. The point is that the people, the public opinion, realize what does it mean now, concretely. And the business, that means even the economy is going a little bit down. There will be some consequences. I mean, I used to work for 3 years in London. This is a very pragmatic people. They will understand where is the interest of the country. And the interest of the country is not outside, is still in.
Roy Broomfield?
Well, London may have voted Remain last year in the referendum, but the rest of the country didn't. And the rest of the country believes that there's a wider world out there that could be tapped into with the benefits of Brexit, negotiated or not, going forward for years to come. And this is not a flash-in-the-pan decision. This is something that the UK can embrace and mould a new vision for itself and place in the world with its allies across borders and continents. And it's a very positive step. And hopefully the people of London will recognise this in time, embrace it, and indeed embrace the opportunities that Brexit can bring.
Yeah, except that...
Could I say...
Go ahead, Mary Honeyball.
Could I say it's no good trying to pin this on London. The result was 48-52. That's hardly anything. It was about 600,000 people out of an electorate of about 42 million. So we're not talking big majorities here. The referendum was carried on a knife edge, and I think those who want to leave should remember that. And I would also say that Project Fear was derided at the time as being too many experts saying too many pessimistic things about the economy. That's being borne out in practice now. We have inflation at the highest since 1997 at 2.9%. The growth in the UK economy is now the lowest in the EU, and we haven't even left yet. Sterling has just plummeted, as we've seen, not before this general election result, and it is still very much down on what it was before. So the economic consequences are already beginning to be felt. And as I said right at the beginning, there are now opinion polls which are beginning to show that people want to change their minds, that they don't think Brexit was such a good idea. They don't believe that we can be a global player. We can't,
but the
as a
UK's...
country, look back to the days of empire when we could be a global player, thanks to the British Empire. We are not there now. We are a medium-sized country. Yes, a great country, it's our country, and I love it as much as anybody else. But we have to recognise where we are and where our future lies, and it lies in cooperation with our neighbours.
But Mary Honeyball, the UK referendum, it's not going to be played out a second time. So what happens next? Is it a harder or a softer Brexit?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just here in Europe, and I agree with the French person who has just been speaking on the panel. Actually, we see it very much from a British perspective in the UK, of course we do, but actually the way you see it here is very different. And in fact, we must recognise that it's the EU 27 who have the power in this. Britain will just be 1 against 27, and that's not a good place to start from. And so we've got to start thinking about how we go forward in this, given our relatively weak position.
François Lafont, that brings us to the topic of Theresa May's host here in Paris. Emmanuel Macron, he doesn't have a hung parliament. He's heading for a 3/4 majority in next Sunday's runoff of legislative elections. How does he play his hand when he's welcoming Theresa May? How does he handle her?
Well, I presume there are two sides of... first is legitimate to say a certain number of things. I mean, it's strong. The political situation of President Macron is very strong. Even if we don't have the result of the second turn of the election, he will have a huge majority, so he will be able to do the reforms he promised during the campaign. That's the first. The second is, of course, we still need UK for a certain number of important issues, for terrorism, for cooperation on defense, for immigration. So he will, of course, continue to make sure that we have the bilateral relation the best possible. But the point is just to make sure that the UK will not impede the 27 other members of the European Union to continue to strengthen the unity and from the eurozone, to make sure that we reinforce the structure in order to make sure the economy is going better. So the point is, we are going to deal.
But if the Germans want to play hardball, for instance, with the UK, will France go along with it?
We will see. I mean, the Chancellor is now in campaigning. We will see the result of the election 24th of September. So let's see how it will move on Germany. But for sure, the President Macron has a clear agenda is in mind, pro-European, and this is not Ms. May who will impede him to continue to do that.
Jeremy Stubbs?
Well, I think it's quite false to say that there are already economic indicators that suggest that we're in a decline and it's all because of Brexit. I mean, we haven't left yet, so I don't see the cause and effect there. I also think that we've been thinking about this for a long time. Many people have been discussing it. There are ways to reach a deal. There are ways. Whether you call them soft or hard, I think is irrelevant. We will reach it, and I think everybody has an incentive to do so. The main thing is that we should stop this period that we've had up until now, whereby people have been engaging in pre-match sparring. Jean-Claude Juncker, I admit on my side there was some of that too. All of that was, all right, it's good
and
for the morale of the troops.
Does Macron understand this? Does Macron understand that he could, according to what you're saying, overplay his hand?
Well, he could do. I mean, he could actually take a lesson from the person he's meeting tonight and say that, you know, things can turn very, very quickly from success to failure. So he should think about that. But the thing is that he and Theresa May have already met. She received him in Downing Street. She's spoken to him. She congratulated him warmly when he was elected. They already have a relationship. I think there is some grounds for hope in that.
Mary Honeyball, you agree?
Well, possibly, yes. I mean, they have met before, but I don't think you can easily compare them. This general election we've just had was the first one Theresa May has ever fought as Prime Minister, and she didn't get anything like near the result that she wanted. Whereas Emmanuel Macron swept to power in France, again on a first attempt, but he won it, and she more or less lost it. I mean, she didn't get the majority she wanted to. So they are at different points in their politics and their political careers. I mean, I hope for the sake of all of us that they do manage to get on and they do actually come up with constructive suggestions. I mean, that's what we want. I mean, we all want this to be resolved in the best possible way for everybody, for the people of Britain and for the citizens of the EU. And I truly hope that that happens.
Rory Broomfield, on election night when we saw Emmanuel Macron come out with his wife and they're playing the EU anthem, Ode to Joy, did you think, oh boy, here comes trouble?
Well, of course, what happens in France is up to the French people, and they obviously have an agenda which is different to the British people's. And I wish them well in their efforts to go deeper and into the Eurozone and into the EU, if that's what they choose. But the British people took a different choice, and we want to work, of course, with European allies in a constructive, pragmatic way.
But what's your sense of Emmanuel Macron? Does he understand all of this?
Well, with a background in international finance, I believe he would have come across a lot of people within, as they say, the Anglo-Saxon banking model in London and New York and elsewhere, and also just genuinely have that perspective of openness, I think, to international trade and international cooperation, which, of course, the UK is still displaying and still wants to display.
François Lafont, you've been a panelist here many times to discuss the woes befalling the EU. For once, on this one, they have the momentum swinging their way. again, it's not just France that could overplay its hand. It's also, you were mentioning the European Union's negotiator, Michel Barnier. It's the people at the Commission. We heard the German finance minister today make remarks to the effect of it's not too late for Britain to reconsider its Brexit vote.
Of course, I mean, the European Union without the UK will not be the same. So that's for sure. So this is better if they reconsider their thought in a certain sense.
When you hear Wolfgang Schäuble say that, is that a provocation or does he mean it?
No, I think that the Germans are quite happy to have the Brits within the European Union because then they can play different countries. I mean, the Franco-German axis could be then with a triangle with the UK. So, but the point is, of course, the UK is a big country, and this is better to have the UK within the European Union. They have made a choice. The point now is just to make sure to have all the negotiation, but to have some decisions, because we cannot wait for just them to think about again more if they have better to go out or to stay in. We have to move on because the world is not waiting for us. I mean, the US, they are taking a certain number of decisions. China, India, Russia is still there. So, I mean, we have to move on.
Rory Broomfield, getting back to what you said a moment ago about your vision of Britain going forward, will that Britain have more in common with the EU or with Donald Trump's United States?
Well, I would say with Anglophone values, but of course that comes into the legal system, which is crucial in this debate. The UK operates in a different way in its legal approach than many EU nations, including France. And of course, we have commonalities with the wider world. But it's not about going back to any empire model. That's not what Brexiteers have ever really advocated, to my mind. It is about seeking cooperation and an open internationalist approach, which, of course, would benefit not just the people of the UK, but benefit people all around the world, knocking down barriers and increasing opportunities.
Mary Honeyball, you agree?
Not completely. First of all, on the whole question of the legal system, I actually sit on the Legal Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, so I do know what I'm talking about. And yes, the systems tend to be different in different countries, but we all believe in the same values. We're all out to achieve the same thing. So though it operates differently, we all have still the basic tenets and the basic values are the same across Europe. So I don't think that argument holds at all. And in terms of the Anglophone countries, it's a very interesting one, this, because we, particularly those of us who are a bit older and are brought up in the times of the Commonwealth, we view these as our natural allies. In fact, I'm not at all certain that most Commonwealth countries want too much to do with us. India has been quite clear that they see another way forward for themselves, and they are now a huge country. Selling goods and exporting to Australia and New Zealand is really not very much because they're not very big countries. Australia is about 5% of the size of the EU, so we're going to lose out if we lose our exports or a lot of our exports to the EU, and we will never make up for it with Australia and New Zealand and Canada. So it just doesn't work like that. And I think there's a real danger in getting too close to the United States. I mean, we've seen what President Trump is like. And there have been obviously United States presidents who we would be very happy to work with, but that isn't always the case. And of course we work with them in NATO and on defence and security issues, and we must continue to do that. But I think that in terms of ourselves, where Britain is in the world, where we're positioned, where our friends are, it's our neighbours. And any country that decides it wants to have looser ties with its neighbours than it already has really ought to think very hard about what it's doing.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We've run out of time. But Mary Honeyball, I want to thank you for joining us from Strasbourg. I want to thank Rory Broomfield in London, Jeremy Stubbs, and François Lafont. Thank you for being with us in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So a lot of buzz on social media, of course, about Theresa May's trip to Paris. And let's take a look at some of the broader commentary about that. Theresa May has flown to Paris for a meeting with Macron and will arrive with all of the impact of a deflating balloon. So there was a lot of that sort of comment on social media contrasting the different fortunes of Emmanuel Macron, who has come out of the first round of parliamentary elections looking like he's going to get a huge majority, and of course Theresa May's failed gamble, I suppose, in calling that snap election. So you have lots of images like this also doing the rounds of social media, picking up on or paraphrasing her, "I got us into this mess, I'm going to get us out of it," with an image from I can't remember the name of the film, but
Austin Powers.
Austin Powers, thank you. The line, "I made this mess, so I'm the best person to fix it," was first used by Home Secretary Charles Clarke, says one Twitter user, pointing out that he was sacked 2 weeks later. In other words, maybe it doesn't bode so well for her. Jeremy Cliff here on Twitter is saying, "A year ago, Tory commentators were grandly hailing Europe's doom, and today Merkel and Macron are riding high while Britain..." Well, editorialising here is a laughing stock. Certainly, fortunes have shifted a lot in 1 year for various political systems. Macron's party polled 32% of the major vote, which is riding high. This is journalist Toby Young. Theresa May's polled 42.5% and is a laughing stock, of course. That's because the political systems are very different.
Voting systems are different, yeah.
Indeed, but it does show that perhaps if you look at the precise figures, things aren't quite what they might seem at first glance. Now, this is all referring to the meeting of Theresa May with Conservative Party MPs, the fact that there's a lot of division after her failed gambling, calling that snap election. I'm really angry that Theresa May apologised to her MPs for this mess, but doesn't think the British public deserve that same response. So a lot of the comment actually is still based on, it's not so much the bilateral meeting with Emmanuel Macron, it's how she is managing the fallout of the general election. And this is one detail that got a lot of coverage as well today. John Major, former Prime Minister, urging Theresa May to pull out of the DUP deal over risk of violence returning to Northern Ireland. That, of course, is a very thorny issue, a party with links in the past to paramilitary organisations and certainly with quite regressive policies, and this coalition is seen as something that could endanger the peace process in Northern Ireland. Theresa May, when your government is considered a threat to peace by Sir John Major, it's time to resign before you hurt Britain anymore. Anyway, there's lots of comments on all of that, Francois, but not sure if we have time to go into many of the other angles being discussed. There's a lot of reaction to the decision to demonise, as some are putting it, social media companies. That's one area that was discussed at one point of, I suppose, convergence in policies, tackling the ability of disseminating terror online. But in fact,
something that Emmanuel Macron and Theresa May were to talk about during their discussions.
Exactly. But online, on social networks, people are warning against censorship, that security versus freedom debate coming back again, as it so often does on this issue.
All right, we're almost out of time. Jeremy Stubbs, is Theresa May going to last more than 2 weeks, Guthrie, like that Twitter user was saying?
I think it's very likely now, yes. As long as she shows the kinds of qualities